All right, hello again, everybody. If you were joining us on the other stream, we had some technical difficulties, so sorry about that. But let's try this again. So thank you so much for joining us for our weekly lecture. As most of you know, hopefully, we have lectures every Thursday related to different topics relating to higher education in the US. You can find all of those lectures on our Facebook page, but the last Thursday of every month is always our Successful Path lecture. So my name is Nellie. I'm one of the advisors and the outreach coordinator at Education USA Ukraine. And today we are really going to have a general overview of the application process to American colleges and universities. So this is, general knowledge so you understand how to start your journey. Okay, so I will speak for probably about 30 to 40 minutes, and then after that we will have time for questions and answers, so please feel free to type your questions into the chat box. If you had already typed any questions into the previous stream, make sure that you type them in again just to make sure I get to them, and I will answer those at the end of the presentation. Okay. So if you're thinking about studying in the US, you need to ask yourself an important question first. What is your final goal? What is your ultimate goal? Because as we will see today, applying to US colleges and universities takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, and even a lot of money, of course. So you really need to ask yourself why you want to do this, and examine your motivations and see if you're really prepared to put in the hard work that it will take. All of these reasons at the top, these are great reasons to study in the US, to deepen your knowledge in your field, to expand your professional connections and meet people from all around the world, even to change your field of study. If you studied something in your bachelor's degree and you'd like to change that, that can be a great reason to go get a master's in the US. Have access to some of the best facilities and technology in the world. All of these are really great reasons to want to study in the US. Some not so great reasons are the US is a great country and I want to live there, or there's nothing for me to do in Ukraine, or I only want to learn English. Those are not so great reasons, because there are, a lot simpler ways to learn English or to improve your English, or to visit the US as a tourist. So again, make sure that you really have good reasons for doing this. Of course, wanting to improve your English can be a great factor in choosing to study in the US, but it shouldn't really be the only reason if you're applying for a degree program, because again, it's going to take a lot of work. It will take up 2 or 4 years of your life. So again, make sure that you understand why you want to do this, and you understand what your ultimate goal is, because even within studying in the US, there are a lot of options that we'll see. And so again, you have to decide what you personally need to move forward, either in your education or in your career. So at Education USA, we have a rather simple scheme, let's call it, 5 steps to studying in the US, because we understand that this process can be overwhelming. It's quite different from the application process to Ukrainian universities. So we break it down step by step, just to help you incrementally through the process, because if you try to look at the whole process all at once, it can be rather overwhelming. So you can see these 5 steps here. Steps 4 and 5, applying for your visa and preparing to depart. You don't have to worry about those until much later in the process. Worry about those after you've been accepted to a university, you're sure you can pay for it, and then you can worry about those things. Usually, you will turn your attention to your visa the summer before you are supposed to begin studying. Okay, so today during this presentation, we're really going to focus just on these first 3 steps, because that's where you have to start your journey. Okay, so here's a little outline of our plan for today. Again, step 1, researching your options. Step 2, financing your education. Step 3, your application package. And then, as I mentioned, we'll have time for questions and answers at the end. So you may be asking, well, what is Education USA? Why should I turn to Education USA? And so it's important to know that we are an official network of the U.S. State Department. We work all around the world in more than 180 countries with more than 435 advising centers, as you see there. So we are the official source of information about U.S. higher education in the U.S. Our job is to provide accurate, up-to-date, comprehensive, and unbiased information about all U.S. higher education opportunities for international students. So we do not promote certain universities. We don't tell you where you should go. We are here as a resource for you to advise you through the process, to help you understand what your options are, and to help you find what's going to be the best option for you personally. So we work with more than 4,000 accredited colleges and universities. We work with all accredited colleges and universities in the U.S., again, to help you find what's going to be best for you. Our main advising center is in Kyiv on Esplanada 20 near the metro station Palac Sportu. Of course, right now we are closed, but once we open back up again, there's a library there with resources that you're welcome to come and use, computers. We often have events in there. And of course, you can come in for an advising appointment. Right now, we are doing everything virtually, and we'll be doing so at least through June. But still, we're available for advising sessions over the telephone, over Skype, lots of options. But I'll talk about all of those later. We also partner with the Window on America centers around Ukraine, which are located in each oblast center around the country. And again, they have resources related to U.S. higher education, test prep materials, all kinds of things. So again, once those are open, please turn to them for resources right in your oblast. Okay, so the first step is researching your options. So you know you want to study in the U.S., but again, that could mean many different things. So you need to ask yourself, what are your career goals? What are your educational goals? Do you need a degree, or do you just want to participate in an exchange program or even an English language program at an American university to improve your professional English or academic English? So there are lots of options. So the best place to find out what those options are and where to start are these three websites up here. The first one, educationusa.state.gov, is our global website for Education USA, so this serves the whole network globally. All of the information there is in English, and there are a lot of really sort of simple steps, again, showing you first step, second step, third step, how to research your options, what options do you have, explaining what a bachelor's degree entails in the US, what a master's degree looks like in the US. And resources for searching for programs, searching for financial aid, and things like that. So it's a really great resource if you're just starting out to sort of explore what higher education in the U.S. looks like and to understand what options you have. The second website here, educationusa.org.ua, that's our Ukrainian website, obviously. All of the information there is in Ukrainian language, and there's lots of basic information there, again, about understanding master's degrees, bachelor's degrees, PhD, LLM, articles about different fields of study, success stories of Ukrainian students who have successfully gone on to study in the US, and also information about exchange programs and scholarship opportunities that are specifically for Ukrainian students. And that's also where you can sign up for an advising appointment with us. So again, great place to start to just sort of orient yourself and understand the structure of higher education in the U.S. and how it compares to that in Ukraine. And the last website here, American Councils. In Ukraine, Education USA is administered by American Councils. So we are in the same office as Flex, as Open World, as SayUp Project, if you've heard of those. So again, on their website, they have lots of information about exchange programs and opportunities specifically for Ukrainians. So those are really the first three places to start to, again, understand what you personally need for your goals. So once you do this research, you will find that essentially there are two paths to studying in the US. The first is to go through an exchange program. that is funded and sponsored by the US government. Many of these you've probably heard of. Flex is for high schoolers, Global UGrad is for current Ukrainian students in Ukrainian universities, SUSI is a summer program for young people, Fulbright, I'm sure many of you have heard of, T is for English teachers, and these other programs for young professionals, and there are many others. This is not what we're going to focus on today, but you can find information about all of these programs on the U.S. Embassy website, and again, also on American Councils and the Education USA Ukraine website. So that's an option to go through an exchange program, but it's important to know that for all of these programs, you do not receive a diploma. So these are not degree programs, with the exception of the Fulbright graduate student program. That is, that program does cover the entire cost of receiving a full master's degree in the US, but that's the one exception. For these other ones, for Flex, for Global UGrad, for SUSI, these are not degree programs, so you will not graduate from an American university with an American bachelor's degree or a master's degree. So that's important to know. But if you want a short-term exchange program just to get some experience, these can be great options, but they are competitive, which is important to know, so you need to apply for them, go through the application process, interview process, and all that stuff. Again, we're not going to focus on this, but you can find so much information about these on our YouTube channel or on our website, or the U.S. Embassy's website. The other step is to apply directly to American universities with your own strength, energy, resources, and things like that. And this is really if you want to earn a degree in the US. So you want to get a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, a PhD degree, an LLM, a JD, any of these kinds of degrees where you want to study for 2 to 4 to 6 years in the US and earn a degree from an American university. That's really what we're going to focus on today. How do you go about that process? So again, these are really the two places to start, is our Ukrainian website and the American Council's website, just to understand what higher education looks like in the US and where to start. And then we have these other programs that I will talk about later. But again, Education USA Ukraine, as an advising center, we are here to help you through the process, to answer all of your questions, and to be a resource for you. Okay. Some important things to know about American colleges and universities as you're starting your journey. As I mentioned, Education USA works with all accredited colleges and universities, and there are more than 4,000 of them. That's a lot. So that's why this process of research is really important and will take more time than you think it will. But we'll talk about how to narrow that down in just a moment. There is no Ministry of Education in the US, so there's no sort of central government body that is managing the system of higher education. And so that means that all US higher education institutions are very independent. So they choose for themselves what programs they have, which departments they have, financial aid, how much financial aid they want to give and to whom they want to give it to. But to me, that's really a great advantage, because it means that all of these 4,000 colleges and universities are all completely different. There are large universities, small universities, religious, non-religious, specialized, private, public. There are just so many options. And so to me, it really means that you can find exactly the best option for you and for what you need. In the US, probably it will not surprise you to learn there's no ZNO in the US. So the application process, as we will see, really depends on more than test results. There are some academic exams for admission. Maybe you've heard of the SAT or the ACT for undergraduate, or the GRE or the GMAT for graduate admissions. But again, these are not administered by the government. They are administered by separate nonprofit organizations, and that is not the only criteria for admission. And many more universities are even not requiring these admission tests. You can apply to as many U.S. colleges and universities at the same time as you want. Usually we recommend quality over quantity, so we encourage you to really focus on making a few applications really strong to universities that you're passionate about, rather than just sending out applications to 40 universities. But technically, there's no limit to how many universities you can apply to at once. And the application process lasts 9 to 12 months. So we typically recommend students that they start preparing to apply to U.S. universities at minimum a year in advance. Even that's a little bit late. Usually a year and a half is even better. So if you're here, it's a great time to start thinking about it. It's never too early. If we're talking about undergraduate students, you should really start exploring this process when you're in 10th grade, because by the time you're in the fall of your 11th grade year, you will already need to be submitting your applications to U.S. universities. So make sure you start thinking about this in 10th grade, start thinking about standardized tests and all those things, okay? And it's important to know that the application requirements for every single college and university are different. So again, that's why this process of research is really important. Don't assume that just because the University of Kentucky does this, that Sarah Lawrence College is going to do the same thing. They likely will have different application requirements, so make sure you research those things carefully. So then here on the right side, we see some sort of general advice, again, for when you're starting out this process. First of all, you have to determine your priorities, because you have more than 4,000 options, actually many more than that if you think about different programs within universities. So how do you figure out what's going to be best for you? And we'll talk about that in just a moment. Be realistic. This is not the fun part of the job, but we do need to tell students, sometimes have a little bit of reality check and just say, be realistic about what is going to be best for you. Usually students, or very often students, come to us and they say, I want to study in the US, I want to study at Harvard, Princeton, Yale, MIT, Stanford, because it's the only universities they've ever heard of in the US. But the truth is that there are more than 4,000 options, and there may be a lot of reasons why these Ivy League schools, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, whatever else, may not be a good fit for you, okay? Or may not be realistic options for you. These schools are very, very, very competitive, and it's, disappointing, or it's unfortunate to see disappointed students because they didn't really think carefully about what their priorities are or what was realistic for them, okay? So again, just make sure that you really diversify your university list, have some dream schools, some comfort schools, some safety schools. We'll talk about that in just a moment, but really be honest with yourself, because you will be much happier at the end. Knowledge of English language is, of course, important. You do not need to be fluent in English to study in the US, but you do need to be able to read lots of texts in English, write in English, understand lectures in English, take tests in English. So if that's something that you feel is a weakness of yours, there are so many ways to work on improving that right here in Ukraine through speaking clubs or online resources. There's just so many things. And again, it's never too early to start improving that if that's something that you are concerned about. And colleges, U.S. colleges and universities will, of course, evaluate your level of English in your application. So that's something that they consider, because, of course, they want you to be successful as well. Academic achievements are important. This could be Olympiads, just your grades from school, any awards, academic clubs, or honors you participated in. So again, if you're still in school or still in university, it's really important to keep those grades up or improve them if you have some weaknesses, and again, take part in academic activities, because that matters for U.S. universities. If we're speaking about master's and PhD programs, you really need to have very clear career goals to apply to U.S. programs. That's less important for bachelor's degrees. Really, when you're just coming out of high school and entering college or university for the first time, in the US, they don't expect you to know exactly what you want to do for your career. The entire undergraduate, by the way, undergraduate is referring to bachelor's degrees. graduate refers to master's and PhD degrees, in case that wasn't clear. For undergraduate education, they don't expect students to know exactly what they want to do, and really the whole system of higher education is set up in the US so that they help students figure out what they want to do, and they give them a lot of flexibility to discover their interests and their strengths. So that's not as important for the undergraduate level. For the graduate level, it is very important. I know in the US, in Ukraine, it can be very common for students to go enter into a master's degree immediately after they finish their bachelor's degree. And in the US, that's not the case. It's not impossible. Some students do that, especially if they want to go into an academic or a research career. But typically they want to see that students have a couple years of work experience between their bachelor's or after their bachelor's degree before they apply to their master's degree, so that they have some professional experience and understand better what kind of career they'd like to have. So again, if you're thinking about for master's or PhD programs, you need to really understand how this is going to help you forward in your career and have a pretty clear direction about where you want to go. And of course, financing is really important to think about. You need to think about this from the beginning because, if you could get accepted to 10 universities, but if you can't pay for it, that's going to be, of course, disappointing. So we'll talk about all of that in just a moment, but make sure that you don't leave this until the last moment. Unfortunately, we receive emails or people sign up for appointments with us in April or May saying, I was accepted to this many universities. I'm very excited. I'm ready to start my studies in September, but I haven't received enough financial aid. How do I pay for it? And by that time, by the spring of the year that you're supposed to start studying, it's really too late. If you need to come up with, $1,000 or $2,000, that can be possible. But if you still need to pay for half of your education, you don't have many options. And that's a sad conversation that we have to have with students because there's nothing we can do to help you at that point. So again, make sure that you're thinking about this ahead of time and turn to us for help as you're thinking about that if you need to know other sources for financing. But we'll talk about all that a little bit later. Okay, so I mentioned determining your priorities. There are more than 4,000 colleges and universities, so how do you choose which one's going to be right for you? Well, think about, where do you want to study? What kind of experience do you want to have? If we're talking about undergraduate, so bachelor's degrees, that's going to be 4 years. For graduate degrees, a master's degree could be 2 years. Some programs are 1 year. Or if we're talking about a PhD, we could be talking about 6 years or more. So again, think about where you want to spend multiple years of your life, because the experience you have in college or university in the US is really important. It's not just about the academic experience, it's about other things as well. So let's start over here with the type of the educational institution. So I mentioned before that there are private and public universities. The important thing to know is that there's no difference in quality between a public and a private university. Some of the best universities in the US are public, some of the best universities in the US are private. There's no difference in quality. There's just a difference in funding. So public universities have two costs, basically. At public universities, there's a cost for in-state students, and there's a cost for out-of-state students. So I am from Michigan, as I mentioned, that's where I am right now. So for me to go to Michigan State University, it would be very cheap. There would be a lower price for me because I'm from Michigan, I pay taxes to Michigan, so to go to university in Michigan, it's much cheaper. But for a student from California or from Texas or from Ukraine or from Mexico, it's going to be more expensive because you're not a resident of Michigan. But it's the same price for any of those out-of-state students. So whether you're an American who's not from that state or an international student, it's going to be the same price for all of those people, but it's going to be higher than it is for a student from Michigan. Generally speaking, public universities tend to offer less financial aid to international students. but there are some exceptions. So again, make sure you do your research, but as a general rule, they tend to be less generous with financial aid. Private universities, on the other hand, are the same price for everybody. So, I'm from Michigan. A private university in Michigan is going to be the same price for me as it is for someone from California, Texas, Mexico, or Ukraine. Same price for all of us. And usually that price is more expensive than a public university. But they tend to be more generous with financial aid. Because private universities are not receiving funding from the state, they don't have to listen to instructions about who to give financial aid to. They can make their own decisions about that without the government telling them who to give priority financial aid to. So that's important to know. Price tag is usually higher on private universities, but they give more financial aid. Public universities are typically cheaper, but they offer less financial aid. Okay, so again, something to think about. Location. This could be important for a lot of different reasons. So as many of you probably know, the US is a very big country with a lot of different climates and geographies. So we have beaches, we have deserts, we have mountains, we have wooded areas, we have big cities, we have small towns, just a lot of different options, coasts and things like that. So again, think about where you want to spend your time. If we're talking about master's or PhD programs, what you want to study will probably heavily impact the location. So if you want to study international relations, it makes a lot more sense to go to school in New York City or Washington, D.C. than it does to study in Dallas, Texas, okay? Because, of course, D.C. and New York City are the centers of international affairs in the U.S., so that's important to think about. If you want to study energy and gas and oil, it makes a lot more sense to go to Texas or Oklahoma than it does to go to Michigan, for example. So, again, make sure you research that carefully about where you're going to be able to get professional experience and connections in your field. For undergraduate, again, that's less important, but it's still something to think about. Cost also is affected by location. So it's probably obvious that it's going to be a lot more expensive to study in a big city than it is to study in a small town or even a medium-sized town. So make sure that you think about that as well. Academic interests, I think that's obvious. If you want to study international relations, look for colleges or universities that have strong international relations programs. And again, read about that program, about their curriculum, and see if it fits your needs. Cost, as we talked about, there are a lot of ways to reduce cost, but again, be realistic about your own costs, how much you can contribute to your education, and how much financial aid you are likely to receive. So this is just, it's all about research. It's all about research and understanding what these universities can offer you. Because there are some universities that don't offer financial aid to international students, period. That's just their policy. So if you know you need financial aid, don't waste your time in applying to those schools. So please read everything carefully and make sure you understand what they can offer to you. Application requirements, again, we'll talk about that a little bit later with your application package, but some universities have more, let's say, heavy requirements, and some of them have less. So think about how much time you have or energy you have to prepare for standardized tests and things like that. Financial aid, we already talked about a bit. Any other special needs that you have, maybe health needs or anything like that. And again, just thinking about the general environment, right? If you want to play sports, that can be an option. We'll talk about that later. Maybe there's a student club that's really important to you that you want to stay involved with in college. But again, just thinking about the general environment, because studying at a university with 2,000 students is going to be very different from studying at a university with 20,000 students. One is not better than the other. You just have to ask yourself, what do I need? How do I learn best? And where do I want to spend for, well, let's say 2 to 6+ years of your life, depending on what degree you're going to get. Okay, so let's talk a little bit then about financial aid. So this is labeled as step 2, but really this needs to be part of the first step, researching your options. You should be looking at financial aid as you're researching your options in terms of where you want to study and the list you come up with for what universities you want to apply to. So make sure you're thinking about this from the beginning. This is just data from the 2018-2019 school year. Of course, we don't have data yet from this academic year, but almost 2,000 Ukrainian students studied in the US. You can see just over half of those are bachelor students, then with master's and PhD students, exchange programs, and OPT. We won't talk about OPT today, but this is the opportunity to work in the US after you finish your studies. We had a lecture about that 2 weeks ago, I guess, and that's on our YouTube channel if you want to learn more about that. But anyway, this number, 1,953, this has gone up every year since 2014, so more and more Ukrainians are going to study in the US every year. And so I want you to understand that this is possible. It's not easy, but it is possible. I think students automatically assume higher education in the US is way too expensive. It's not possible. And it is expensive. I'm not going to lie to you about that. But there are almost 2,000 Ukrainian students just this past year who were able to find ways to finance their studies through creative ways, through scholarships. So it's not easy, but it is certainly possible. So these are some questions that we're going to look at in this section, because I think it's important to understand some of the motivations behind universities and why they give money and to who they give money, because that will help you understand how to match yourself to the university's expectations. So the first thing to understand is what exactly makes up the cost of studying in a university. So Вартість навчання, this is what we call in English the cost of attendance. So this is the full cost of studying and living at this particular university for one academic year, okay? But it's important to understand that there are two parts there, essentially. There's tuition and fees. So this is, of course, the payment for actual educational instruction using different facilities, lab equipments, libraries. These fees are usually just lumped together in one sum, and the university may break it down and show you exactly this much is for libraries, this much is for lab equipment, or it might just be one sum. So you've got usually this tuition and fees, they say, is $22,000, okay? But then, of course, you have to think about living costs, okay? Because you not only need to study, you also need to eat and sleep somewhere. So this consists of what we call room and board. So again, that's where you sleep and what and where you eat. Books and supplies, transportation, of course. If you're living in a big city, you might have to get a metro pass or a bus pass, or if you're in a small town, maybe you want to get your own car and you're going to have to pay for gas and things like that. Car insurance. Personal expenses, because of course you're going to want to go to the movies every once in a while or go out with your friends, and health insurance. Health insurance is mandatory, обов'язково, for every international student, so make sure that you remember that cost as well. The nice thing is that most universities will give you an estimate for living costs. So on their website, they would say, you know, the average cost of living at this university for, and in this town for one academic year is $12,000, okay? And of course, there are ways to make those costs lower. So regarding room and board, you know, living on campus in a dormitory is usually more expensive than living off campus in a house or an apartment with some friends. But some universities have requirements about living on campus, so you may have to live on campus. You might not have a choice, just depends on the university. And of course, cooking for yourself, making your own food is usually cheaper than eating in the dining hall, but that of course takes more time and energy. So you have to decide for yourself the trade-off, the opportunity cost there. Again, books and supplies, there are ways to make those things cheaper by buying used books, you know, getting digital versions that may be cheaper, sharing with a friend, anything like that. So there are ways to make those costs come down, but usually they provide an average. So again, we have these two costs together. I think I said, you know, tuition and fees might be $22,000, living costs is $12,000. So the cost of attendance, we call it, is $34,000. So make sure that you're thinking about those things together. And again, these living costs in a big city are going to be a lot more expensive than in a small town or even a medium-sized city, okay? So make sure you don't forget about this. You might see tuition is $15,000 and say, wow, that's pretty good. I can definitely afford that. But don't forget that you have living costs as well. This is typical what you might see, sort of a statement on a university's website about their financial aid. They usually say something like, limited grant funding is available to the highest achieving international applicants based on need. So we see a couple of important things here. First of all, that it's limited, right? They don't have infinite money, so they have to decide who to give it to. So they're going to give it to the highest achieving international applicants. So we'll talk about what those achievements could be based on need. So some universities have need-based financial aid and some of them do not. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. But of course, they try to give financial aid to students who need it more than other students. Okay, so different types of financial aid. The first source is your own costs. That's really the first step, is to ask yourself or have a conversation with your family or your parents or your caregivers about how much can we provide every year for my education. That's really where you have to start. And something is always better than nothing. Okay, so if the university has two students who are exactly the same in terms of achievements, grades, test results, things like that, and one student says I can pay $2,000 a year for my education, and one student says I can't pay anything a year for my education, you know, they're going to take the student who can pay something because it's cheaper for the university. So something is always better than nothing. And then the second source of financial aid will be financing directly from the university. So these types of scholarships typically take three forms. This might be merit-based need. So this is, again, associated with your academic achievements, including your grades in school or at university, any Olympiads you participated in, competitions, academic clubs. Your standardized test scores can really help with financial aid. So again, TOEFL, IELTS, SAT, ACT, GRE, GMAT. So leadership, even volunteering activities. So they kind of look at you, your academic merit and your extracurricular merit, because they want to see what is the student going to contribute to our university. So that all counts, and they evaluate that when deciding who to give merit scholarships to. Then there are need-based scholarships, and not all universities have need-based scholarships, but some do. Again, this requires you to research and look on the university's website and read what they say they can offer to international students. So need-based is just based purely on your financial need. Typically, it's still a little bit tied to merit. So of course, even if you have a high need, if you have, got terrible grades in school and didn't do well in standardized tests, that does not necessarily mean they're going to give you money just because you need it. They're usually still looking at, okay, these high achieving students, but who have a high level of need. Again, they give need-based scholarships to students who have more financial need than those that don't. But again, not all universities offer need-based scholarships. Some of it is just merit-based. And then there are athletic scholarships. This is sort of a whole other topic of conversation because it's just a little bit more complicated. But it is possible to get scholarships to play sports for a college or university, but you really need to be a good athlete. So this is not like, I play volleyball once a week with my friends. It's like serious athlete. You'll have to contact the coach, send them videos of you playing, like a portfolio, and that's a longer conversation. But it is possible, and we've had some Ukrainian students go play sports for American universities with scholarships. There's working during studying. There are limitations there, of course. It's only 20 hours per week during the academic year, and then up to 40 hours per week on holidays like fall break or Christmas break or summer break. And there are lots of options to work on campus, usually in a library, in the gym, in a cafe, in a lab, something like that. So there are options to do that as well. But you're rather limited in that you have to work on campus. So You can only go work off campus, again, on OPT or CPT that I mentioned before. These are special work permissions for international students. There's a process to apply for that, and limitations as well. Again, I encourage you to watch the lecture we had 2 weeks ago on our YouTube channel about that. So don't assume that you can just get a job at Starbucks off campus down the street from your university and pay for your studies, because there are limitations. And usually these jobs on campus are around minimum wage. Some may be a little bit higher, but that could be anywhere from $7.50 to $10 or $12 an hour. And again, at only 20 hours per week, you're not going to be making a fortune. So do not depend on that to pay for your whole education. Usually that can help pay for books or transportation or, pocket money for personal expenses, things like that. Loans could be a possibility. Again, there are limitations there because you do not, as an international student, you do not have access to loans from the federal government, but there are some third-party organizations and lending companies that do loan money to international students. Again, we're not going to go into detail about that because that should really be kind of like a last resort, because these loan companies usually have pretty high interest rates, but it is an option, especially if you have a cosigner in the US. That could be sort of a last resort option if you needed it. Sponsors or sort of other programs, community funds, organizations, things like that. So these could be external scholarships. So apart from financial aid from the university, you could apply for scholarships from, again, some kind of community funds, organizations, Ukrainian diaspora groups. There are lots of organizations out there, especially ones that are field specific. So for example, the American Chemical Society might give out scholarships for international students. Again, these are usually tied to merit, but there are lots of external sources of financial aid that can help you pay for your studies, okay? The most important thing to note, though, is that the best way to finance your education is to combine all of these sources of financial aid. Do not depend on one source of financial aid, or don't put all your eggs in one basket, as we say in English. So myself, even as an American student, when I studied at university, I contributed my own costs. I got merit-based and need-based financial aid from the university. I worked during my studying. I took out loans, and I applied for external scholarships from community funds and things like that. So that's 5 different sources of financial aid that I put together to finance my education. Okay, so please make sure you diversify your sources, research all your options, and think about this early. Okay, so why do universities give financial aid? They're really thinking about you as an object of investment. Maybe that doesn't sound very pleasant, but it's true, and it makes sense. So when they are giving you financial aid, they are thinking of you as an object of investment that will have returns later for their university, and so they use that to encourage or to attract strong prospective students. So if you show a lot of potential, they want you to come to their university. So they, if you go on then to do something great, become a great leader or politician, or write a book, or do some important research, or become a prominent performer, they can say, that student went to our university. And so you're like a walking advertisement for them, right? So that's really how they're thinking about it. They're using financial aid as a way to attract students with a lot of potential to their university. So it's important to understand the expectations of the university. And as I mentioned, they don't want you to just sit in the library and be a good student for 4 years. They also want you to contribute to the campus through leadership, through volunteering, through other activities. So it's important to think about those things as well and develop some of those things while you're still in school or in university in Ukraine, because those things will matter when they decide who to give financial aid to. So again, there could be a student who has really excellent grades, but maybe they haven't done anything outside the classroom. They just had really good grades in high school. And then if you compare that with a student who maybe had some lower grades, like still good grades, but not as strong as the other student, but they had leadership roles in their student government, or they volunteered with their local community organization and did tutoring after school for primary school students. The university is going to look at those two applications and probably accept the student who had lower grades but more extracurricular activities, because they see, this person has other things to contribute to our university potentially. Okay. So why do you need to know this? Because you need to make sure that your application responds to what criteria that specific university is looking for. So like I said, not every university is looking for the same thing. I had a rather unique university experience. I attended a small women's college, so only women studied there. There were no male students there. And so it was very important that I addressed that in my application and talked about why I wanted to attend a women's college, because that's a very unique thing. Most universities are not, women's colleges in the US. And so if I had completely ignored that in my application, they would have said, well, does this student really understand what we have to offer? Does she understand what makes us different or unique from other universities, right? So again, you need to understand the expectations of the university and what they're looking for in their students. And you can find all of this info on their website by attending webinars with them where they talk about what they're looking for in the application package. So it's not a secret. They usually make it pretty clear what they're looking for. Okay, so again, just highlighting that you'll be successful if your achievements and potential responds to the criteria that they are looking for. So that's why it's important that you don't just come up with one application and send it out to 13 universities. Your applications really need to be specific to each university that you're applying for. Okay. So again, financial aid is given as an exchange for achievements, typically, if we're talking about directly from the university. Here we see basically we give them what we think that they are worth, again, in terms of what they can offer to the university. So speaking specifically about achievements, again, this could be many different things, but the most important things would be high test scores. So again, not all universities require test results for the SAT or the ACT or the GRE if we're talking about grad school. But if you want to get good financial aid, it will really help you to get good grades on those tests, good scores on those tests. Your средний балл, or GPA, really matters from school and from university. Your motivation that you show in your essay or statement of purpose, and strong recommendations from people who know you well. That's the most important thing. I'm not going to go into recommendations now. We have a separate lecture about that. But again, it's really important that you ask for these letters of recommendation from people who know you really well. Professional achievements, if we're talking about master's or PhD applicants, it's really important that you have some professional experience where you can show this is how I improved work at my organization, at this company. These are internships I've taken, things like that. And then just generally being socially active and leadership experiences are important as well, whether it's volunteering or in the community, things like that. Okay. I think this is pretty clear by now. The higher your academic achievements, the higher your chance of receiving financial aid from the university. Okay. If we're comparing who has higher chances to receive financial aid, comparing bachelor students, master's students, and PhD students, if we're thinking of them as an object of investment, typically doctors, PhD students receive the most financial aid because, they already have some demonstrated worth to the university. If they're going into a PhD program, they're likely going to do some important research, write a thesis, write a book even. So again, the university has a much higher chance of getting some sort of payoff from that, right? Because they'll be able to say, oh, this doctor did this research at our university. This research wrote this book while he was at our university, right? And then a little bit less chances for master's students and a little bit less for bachelor students. Again, that's not to say that bachelor students can't receive financial aid. It's just that typically it's lower because you don't have sort of as much demonstrated worth to the university yet because you haven't lived as much life. But again, as a bachelor student, I still received rather generous financial aid. So I'm not saying you won't get anything. I'm just saying that for doctoral students, it's really good news because typically those programs will be fully funded or almost fully funded. And then speaking of fully funded, that's a really big question that we get is, how can I receive a повну стипендію at an American university? If you're a bachelor student, I got to tell you that very rarely happens. It has happened. It's not impossible, but it's extremely rare because most universities just don't offer that. It's not even an option. They don't even consider offering full scholarships to students. Okay. So I'm just going to tell you right now, if you are putting all of your eggs in that basket, that's a mistake because it really rarely happens. So please, again, don't depend on that, okay? But there can be great opportunities to get half tuition scholarships, even sometimes full tuition scholarships, and then you have to pay for your living costs. So again, there are good chances to receive generous financial aid, but if you're looking for a full ride, you are probably going to be disappointed. Just to give you a little bit of a reality check there. And then there's some dependence on your field of study. So if we're comparing hard sciences, we call them, humanities and social sciences, or medicine, business, and law, students in the hard science field, so we call that STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, typically have the highest chances of receiving financial aid because those fields are constantly developing, right? There are a lot of chances to contribute to that field, and we need good people in those fields. So usually there are higher chances to receive financial aid for STEM students. Again, that's not to say if you're studying humanities or social sciences, you can't receive financial aid. I studied history and theater and was still able to receive pretty generous financial aid. If we're speaking about medicine, business, and law, so typically we're talking about the graduate level here. So MBAs, LLMs, or MD degrees. There's usually limited financial aid for those fields because those are the highest paid professions in the US. So the logic is you'll go on to get a career where you will earn a lot of money, so your education will pay itself off. So if you want to go into those fields on the graduate level, typically don't depend on getting a lot of financial aid for that. Okay. We talked about this a little bit already, but just to highlight for bachelor's versus master's and PhD students, the types of financial aid are essentially the same, with one difference. For master's and PhD students, you can sometimes get assistantships, either in the form of a teaching assistantship, a research assistantship, or an administrative assistantship, where you work with a teacher or work with a professor to do research, to teach their classes, or you might have an administrative assistantship in your department where you help with administrative work, preparing materials for professors' classes, and that can be a really good offering of financial aid. Okay, typically those are not available for bachelor students. Again, there's work on campus, but that's usually an hourly wage, whereas assistantships typically come as a sort of a lump sum towards your tuition. Okay, so as a final point, how to increase your chances of getting a good scholarship. Make sure, again, that you are matching yourself to universities with application requirements that make sense with your profile and what you have to offer. Show yourself from the best sides. Submit applications to multiple universities. So I talked about this earlier, but if you have a list of 12 universities you want to apply to and they are all Ivy League schools, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Stanford, you are making a mistake. It doesn't matter how wonderful you are, how good your grades are, how many extracurricular activities you have, you need to diversify your list. So we usually recommend that you have, 30% are your dream schools. These are your amazing, I would love to go there, this is my dream to attend that school. And then 40% of comfort schools where we say, I'm not quite as excited about those as my dream schools, but I know I would be happy there. I'm almost certain I would get accepted, and I think they would be a good fit for me. And then 30% safety schools, where these are your, if everything else goes wrong, these are not universities I'm super excited about, but I think I would be fine there, and I'm sure I can get accepted. So again, diversify your university list to increase your chances of not only getting accepted, but getting different financial aid offers, because you will get different financial aid offers from different universities, and being able to compare those and make a decision that will be best for you after you receive those acceptances will be really helpful to you. Again, combining sources of financial aid, don't depend on one thing, and sticking to the deadlines and submitting the right documentation. Unfortunately, that's where a lot of students get caught up, is where they didn't submit something that was necessary, or they didn't meet the deadline, and Americans tend to be pretty strict about those things. So make sure that you know what you need to submit and when you need to submit it. Okay. We do have a program called the Opportunity Funds Program, where we assist high-need students with the cost of applying to American universities. So not the cost of studying at an American university, but the cost of applying, because there are costs associated with taking standardized tests, application fees, visa fees, things like that. We can help out with those. You can read more about this on our website, but you need to be a member of the Competitive College Club, which we have applications for every year. And you need to have sort of a demonstrated potential and a high chance of getting accepted to U.S. universities and receiving financial aid. Okay. Okay. So you've researched your options. You're applying to universities that can offer you good financial aid. You've matched yourself to your universities depending on what they're looking for. So now you need to put together your application package. Again, all universities and colleges have different application requirements, so please make sure you read them carefully. But this is what a typical application package would look like. Application form with your personal data, any copies of diplomas or certificates, and transcripts as well, so they can see all your grades, your essay or personal statement, recommendation letters, scores from your standardized tests, a resume if you have some professional experience, if we're talking about master's or PhD programs, and any other documents they may require. There might be supplemental essays, or if we're talking about creative fields, they may want to see a portfolio, something like that. Okay. Regarding the standardized tests, please make sure that you prepare for these well in advance. Again, that's where we see a lot of students sort of I don't know how to say it in English, but that's where we see students kind of, that's where they usually falter, is they're doing really well putting together the application. They are very confident about the standardized tests, and then they do very poorly on the standardized tests, and it's really hard to recover from that, because those standardized test scores do matter. So please make sure that you prepare for these well in advance. We typically recommend 4 to 6 months in advance that you should make a study plan for yourself, because even if you know English really, really well, these tests are testing your English and your knowledge in a different way. Okay, so you really need to understand the structures, what's expected of you, get used to the conditions in which you need to take the test, and just practice, practice, practice. Okay. Again, we have resources for that. We have lectures on our YouTube channel about all of these standardized tests: TOEFL versus IELTS, SAT, ACT, GRE, GMAT. So please check those out, and make sure that you study for these well ahead of time and register for them well ahead of time, because those testing centers can fill up. And give yourself enough time to retake the tests if you don't do as well as you would like to. Okay, step 4. Submit your application for your student visa. Step 5, prepare for your departure. Again, not going to go into detail about all of these, because you have a lot of time before you have to worry about that. But we do have a pre-departure orientation every year in June for students who have been accepted, where we have someone from the consular section at the embassy come talk about visas. We tell you what to do, what not to do, what to pack, what not to pack, how to get a bank account, whatever else in the US. So we're here to help with that process, but we're not going to talk about that today. Again, these are some final resources. This recording will be on our YouTube channel, so you're welcome to come back to this and look at it later. All these websites I've already mentioned up here. These are resources for searching for colleges and universities on the bachelor's level, and some resources for finding financial aid, or figuring out what major specialist you'd like to study in the US. But again, on the bachelor's level, you don't have to know that when you're entering. For some fields you do, like for engineering, you really need to know that ahead of time because it's a rather full program and you don't have a lot of wiggle room to be flexible with that. But most other fields, you have time to figure it out. They will help you figure out what you're passionate about if you don't already know. And then some websites for searching for graduate schools for master's and PhD programs. It can be really helpful to look for professional associations in your field in America because often those associations and websites will have, they might have lists of universities that have really good programs in that field, or they might have resources about what careers could I pursue in this field? What fellowships or scholarships are there for students who want to pursue this field? So make sure you look into that. And of course, we are on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. You can email us. We're on Telegram as well. On our Facebook page is where you can find all of our upcoming events and our lectures. Again, we have lectures every single Thursday at 5 p.m. We're going to have some really interesting sessions in June, including next week. We're going to have a really great session with an admissions officer, and she's going to tell us how universities evaluate student applications and sort of give us an inside look at what they're looking for in an application. So that should be really interesting. All right, I think that's everything. And with that, I'm going to turn to our questions on YouTube. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat box now. I hope this has been helpful. And as I mentioned, we are doing virtual advising right now, but we are all working from home. So again, on our website, educationusa.org.ua, you can sign up for a consultation with any of our advisors. You select the topic you'd like to speak about, the time, and we will speak with you again over the phone, over Skype, whatever is most comfortable for you. And we are here to answer all of your questions from the very beginning of the process, from I want to study in the US, what do I do, all the way to the end where, again, you're applying for your visa or preparing to depart. So we're here to help with all of that process. All right, let's see if there are any questions in the chat box. With you again over the phone, over Skype, whatever is most comfortable for you. And we're here to answer all of your questions from the very beginning. I see that the chat is disabled, but let me check and see if any questions came in on the other stream that I didn't get to answer. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions over here. I did see one question. What is an immigration check? I'm not sure. I don't know if Deanna is still watching. I'm not sure what you mean by that. But regarding your student visas, again, that's sort of a different topic to talk about. But what the consular officers are typically looking for, again, Education USA doesn't have any control over that process. But typically what the consular officers want to see is that you understand why you've chosen the university that you're applying to. So again, they will ask you, why did you choose this university? How did you pick this university? Because they want to see that you've gone through that process of research and really have thought about this process. And they want to see that you can pay for your education. That's really important. And they want to discern that you are not using this as an opportunity to immigrate to the US, because maybe that's what you're referring to. That's one thing that is a red flag for them. They really want students to use this opportunity to get an education in the US and to use those skills to return to their home country and use those skills and share them with their home country. So that's usually what they're looking for in red flags is this student just trying to use this as an opportunity to immigrate to the US? Because they don't like to see that. All right, I don't see any other questions, so I hope this has been helpful for you. But as I mentioned, we're here to answer all of your questions. So you're welcome to just email us, send us a message on Facebook, send us a message on Instagram. We are everywhere. So please feel free to contact us. Thank you so much for joining us despite some technical difficulties. Check out our Facebook page for our June lectures. And I hope you're all staying healthy, staying safe. And thank you so much for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Bye, everybody.